Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S IAS Study Cell. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 3rd September 2022. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start the discussion. This article on page number 6 has been written in the context of the recently held review meeting of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or the NPT Treaty. In this review meeting, which was the 10th review meeting of the NPT, there has not been any viable outcome. And this has mainly been because of the differences between the opinion of the member countries of the NPT Treaty. In this backdrop, in this article, we'll try to understand what exactly is this Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, what are its important features, how a country can become the member of the NPT, who all are already the members of the NPT. Further, in this line, we will also look at why did the 10th review meeting of the NPT fail to bring out any important outcome. After that, we will look at why India did not sign or accede to the NPT Treaty. Now, besides the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or the NPT Treaty, there is another important treaty that was finalized recently related to nuclear disarmament, and that is Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons or the TPNW. So in this line, we will also look at few features of the TPNW treaty. Now, if you look at the features of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, it was negotiated in 1960s. Now, this was the time when world had seen the devastation that was caused by the nuclear weapon that was used during the Second World War on two important cities of Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that is why the nuclear powers at that point of time understood the importance of stopping the spread of nuclear weapons to other countries. And that is why they formulated a treaty that is known as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In this, the key objectives of the NPT are that it aims at limiting the spread of nuclear weapons, which include first, non-proliferation, that is, there should not be any spread of nuclear weapons beyond the countries that already possess these nuclear weapons. Second is disarmament of the nuclear weapons. If they exist, the nuclear weapons should reduce in number, and also ultimately we should have a world where there is no existence of the nuclear weapons because it is a clear threat to the existence of the humanity itself. And thirdly, it allows for peaceful use of nuclear energy. Now in this line, if you look at the negotiations that happened during the course of finalization of the NPT Treaty, the first point related to or the first objective of non-proliferation was forwarded by the countries which possess the nuclear weapons at that point of time. And these included the countries which include UK, US, France, Russia, as well as China. However, the second and the third objective related to disarmament and peaceful use of nuclear energy were forwarded by developing countries. So their demand was also incorporated in the objectives of the NPT Treaty. However, much success has not been visible in case of nuclear disarmament, and the nuclear non-proliferation has not also been very successful because even after the finalization of NPT, there are countries which have acquired the nuclear weapons. In this line, one of the important features of the NPT Treaty is that it defines which countries are termed as nuclear weapon states. So this treaty defines the nuclear weapon states or the NWS as those states that had manufactured and detonated a nuclear explosive device prior to 1st January 1967. Now, this was the cutoff date that was set up by the NPT Treaty that all those countries who have detonated a nuclear explosive device prior to 1st January 1967 will only be considered as nuclear weapon states under the NPT. And all other states are therefore considered as non-nuclear weapon states or NNWS under this treaty. And accordingly, there were only 5 countries which had detonated a nuclear explosive device prior to 1st January 1967. And these countries included China, France, Russia, UK and United States of America. So according to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, there are only 5 nuclear weapon states which include China, France, Russia, UK and United States of America. So this is one important thing that we should be aware of. Further, regarding the rights of the non-nuclear weapon states, this treaty does not prohibit these states from using nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. For example, they can set up nuclear power plants and things like that. Further, the compliance of any particular country to the NPT Treaty is verified by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So the IAEA verifies the non-nuclear weapon states and their compliance with the commitments under the NPT to not acquire nuclear weapons. This is because this treaty clearly defines that there can only be 5 nuclear weapon states. And if any country becomes a member or accedes to the NPT treaty, that country will have to clearly dispose of its nuclear weapons. And that is why it is the duty of IAEA to verify the non-nuclear weapon states and their compliance with the commitments that they have set up under the NPT to not acquire any nuclear weapons in the future. So this brings us to who all are the members of the NPT, and also how can a country become the member of the NPT. So if you look at the membership of the NPT, there are around 191 states that are party to this treaty. However, countries like South Sudan, India, Israel and Pakistan, they have never acceded to this treaty. And if you look at North Korea, it acceded to this treaty in 1985, but it never came into compliance and hence it announced its withdrawal from the NPT treaty in 2003. Now in this line, we are aware that India, Israel, Pakistan and North Korea, they also possess nuclear weapons. However, they are not considered as nuclear weapon states under the NPT treaty. So this is an important thing that we should be aware of. Now, if these countries want to accede to the NPT treaty, what they need to do? What is the condition for these countries to become a member of the NPT, or how these countries which possess the nuclear weapons can accede to this NPT treaty? So in order to accede to this treaty, these states must do as the non-nuclear weapon states have done in the past. Now in this line, we are aware that the treaty restricts the nuclear weapon status to only those nations that had manufactured and detonated a nuclear explosive device prior to a date which has been set up, that is prior to 1st January 1967. So any country which has detonated the nuclear explosive device after the 1st January 1967 cutoff date, which includes India, Israel, Pakistan and North Korea, all have detonated their nuclear explosive device after 1st January 1967. And that is why to accede to the non-proliferation treaty, countries like India, Pakistan, Israel and North Korea will have to dispose of their nuclear weapons. So for India, Israel and Pakistan to join this treaty would require that they dismantle their nuclear weapons and place their nuclear materials under the international safeguards with International Atomic Energy Agency. Now earlier, the South Africa possessed the nuclear weapons. However, when it acceded to the non-proliferation treaty, it had to dismantle its nuclear weapons. So this is a clear precedent that we are aware of, where a nuclear weapon state had to dismantle its nuclear weapons to accede to the NPT treaty. And that is why if India, Israel, Pakistan and North Korea, which are known to be possessing the nuclear weapons, if they want to accede to the NPT treaty, they will have to dismantle their nuclear arsenal. So these are some of the key features of the NPT treaty, its objectives, its members and the process of a country to accede to the NPT treaty. Now this brings us to what was the reason for the failure of the 10th Review Conference to bring out any outcome related to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now recently, when the 10th Review Conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty members was held, there was no clear-cut outcome. And this was primarily because of the disagreement between the member countries and the nuclear weapon countries, including Russia and America. In this line, the final draft statement of the NPT Review Conference meeting included references to Russia's control of some of the nuclear power plants in Ukraine. And that is why Russia had objected to such references in the statements to Russia's military control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southeast of Ukraine. And you should be aware that a military contest is going on between Russia and the Ukrainian forces around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And this is raising the prospect of a horrible nuclear emergency in the near future. And that is why there was no final conclusion where such references against Russia were not accepted by Russia. So in this line, from prelims examination perspective, we should be aware of the location of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which has continuously been in news. So if you look at the location of this, it is located in Ukraine and a fighting is going on in this particular region, which is threatening or which can lead to a nuclear emergency in the near future. Now, since this was the review meeting of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, let us look at an analysis of functioning of the Non-Proliferation Treaty since it has been finalized. So if you look at the successes of the NPT treaty, when it was finalized, it was assumed that in the next 50 years since its inception, there will be around 24 more nuclear weapon states. However, that has not happened. And only 4 countries have got the nuclear arsenal beyond the nuclear weapon states recognized by the NPT treaty. These include India, Israel, North Korea, and Pakistan. South Africa, of course, it had nuclear weapons, but it dismantled these nuclear weapons to accede to the NPT treaty. Further, if you look at the progress related to the disarmament under the NPT treaty, the arms control talks between US and the erstwhile USSR or Russia did take place, and two countries had succeeded in bringing down their collective nuclear arsenals from a high of nearly 65,000 in early 1980s to less than 12,000 nuclear warheads in the recent times. However, the success of the NPT treaty has been limited, and there have been various instances of the failures in the functioning of the NPT treaty. Now, in this line, we are aware that one of the objectives of the NPT treaty was disarmament. However, no meaningful discussion or negotiations on nuclear disarmament have taken place in the NPT framework. Further, in the early 1980s, there was a growth in the nuclear arsenals. That is, few years after the finalization of the NPT treaty, growth in the nuclear arsenal was witnessed. Further, the arms control talks between the US and Russia have come to a halt because of the present crisis that is happening in case of Ukraine. And both the countries have steadily focused on increasing their nuclear capabilities in the recent past. Further, China is not ready to participate in the nuclear talks given its rivalry with US, etc. And particularly the Taiwan crisis has further complicated the situation of talks between US and China related to nuclear disarmament. And also the complications in the current geopolitics and the rivalries that exist are further complicating the situation. That is, the growing strategic rivalry between China, Russia and the US, further rising nuclear rhetoric, as well as modernization plans for nuclear arsenal are all a setback to the objectives of the NPT treaty. In this line, in the current scenario, there are challenges that are faced by the global nuclear order. First, of course, is the deepening divide between the main sponsors of the NPT treaty, that is America and Russia. So America and Russia were the sponsors of the NPT treaty, but there is an increasing divide between their approach for negotiating at the NPT framework. Further, the non-nuclear weapon states which are party to the NPT treaty have complained about lack of progress in implementing the disarmament provisions of the NPT treaty. Further, the invasion of a non-nuclear weapon state, Ukraine, by a nuclear-powered country, Russia, has raised the questions regarding the possession of nuclear weapons. That is, had Ukraine possessed the nuclear weapons till date, it would not have faced an attack from the Russian side. But because Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons after its disintegration of the USSR, it has come under attack from Russia, which is a nuclear weapon state. So in this line, this is bringing a rethinking in the countries which do not have nuclear weapons to possess these nuclear weapons in the future to create a deterrence against adverse neighbors. Further, China is also complaining against the AUKUS arrangement in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, AUKUS is basically a security partnership between Australia, UK and the United States of America. And in this, one of the important provisions of this AUKUS security partnership is that US and UK would be supplying nuclear submarine technology to Australia. However, China sees it as a violation of the NPT treaty. And finally, the nuclear power is again assuming importance in the backdrop of the climate change related issues, where we are aware that the coal-based power plants are major issues that are leading to increasing carbon emissions. And in order to replace these coal-based power plants with nuclear power plants can be one of the solutions. In this line, let us look at why did India oppose the NPT treaty. So in this line, we are aware that India has not signed the NPT treaty. And this has primarily because India states that the NPT treaty creates a club of nuclear haves and it creates a larger group of nuclear have-nots. So we are already aware that it defines the nuclear weapon states as only those countries which have detonated a nuclear explosive device prior to 1st January 1967. And that is why it creates a divide in the global community where only these 5 countries can possess the nuclear weapons according to this treaty, and it creates a larger number of countries which are nuclear have-nots. So this is a kind of disparity that has been created. And further, India considers NPT as a flawed treaty as it does not recognize the need for universal, non-discriminatory verification and treatment. Also, India is against the arbitrary date of 1st January 1967 that has been set up to outline or to delineate the nuclear weapon states under the NPT treaty. So these are the basic 3 points on which India opposes the NPT treaty, and that is why it has not acceded to the NPT treaty till date. Now, when progress was not being witnessed under the NPT framework related to nuclear disarmament, which is also one of the objectives of the NPT treaty, the non-nuclear weapon countries had negotiated a treaty on prohibition of nuclear weapons, or the Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty as it is called commonly. Now, this treaty was adopted in July 2017 and it entered into force on 22nd January 2021. Now, this agreement was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2017 and it is seen as the first legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, and it will lead towards their complete elimination in the near future. In this line, the efforts for the finalization of the TPNW treaty was spearheaded by International Campaign on Abolition of Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, and for this it was awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace in 2017. Now, coming to the features of the TPNW, it bans the use, possession, development, testing, deployment, as well as transfer of the nuclear weapons under the international law. It prohibits state parties from developing, testing, producing, manufacturing, acquiring, possessing, or stockpiling the nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. Further, the signatories to this treaty are barred from transferring or receiving the nuclear weapons and other nuclear explosive devices. Also, states are prohibited from using or threatening to use the nuclear weapons and other nuclear explosive devices. And finally, the parties to the TPNW cannot allow the stationing, installation, or deployment of nuclear weapons and nuclear explosive devices in their territory. And finally, the state parties to TPNW are obligated to provide victim assistance and help with environmental remediation efforts. So these are few features of the TPNW which aims at completely eliminating the nuclear weapons, their use, the technology for development of nuclear weapons, the transfer of technology, as well as transfer of nuclear weapons. Now, as far as the compliance mechanism related to TPNW is concerned, we are aware that for NPT, the International Atomic Energy Agency is the one which verifies the compliance of the non-nuclear weapon states with their commitments under the NPT. However, this treaty TPNW does not contain a verification regime, and it loosely states that each state party must maintain its existing safeguard agreements with the International Atomic Energy Agency. So it does not clearly highlight the verification regime related to the compliance of the member countries with the TPNW. The next important thing that we need to understand is how can a country accede to this treaty. So there are two ways for a nuclear weapon state to accede to this treaty. And mainly the nuclear weapon states are not party to this TPNW, which includes all the nuclear weapon states under the NPT as well as the new nuclear weapon states like Israel, Pakistan, India, etc. So for nuclear weapon states to accede to this treaty, they can join the treaty and then destroy its nuclear weapons, or they can destroy the nuclear weapons first and then join this particular treaty. So states that destroy and join must cooperate with a competent international authority designated by the treaty to verify disarmament or dismantlement. However, it does not clearly specify which is this competent international authority. That is one of the issues in the functioning of the TPNW. However, it only states that any current or former nuclear weapon state, if it wants to join this particular treaty, will have to conclude a safeguard agreement with International Atomic Energy Agency. That is it. And lastly, let us look at what is India's stand on the TPNW. So in this line, India did not participate in the negotiations on the TPNW, and that is why it does not want to become a party to the treaty. Further, India does not support the treaty and shall not be bound by any of the obligations that may arise from it. In this line, India believes that this treaty does not constitute or contribute to the development of customary international law, nor does it set any standards or norms. So this is the opposition that India has filed against the TPNW. So in this discussion, we have seen various aspects and the features of the NPT treaty, what are its objectives, who all are the members, and how a nuclear weapon possessing country can become or accede to this NPT treaty. Also, we have seen the successes and the failures in the functioning of the NPT in the past, and also what are the current challenges related to global nuclear order. And finally, India's stand, as well as key features related to Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 6 talks about India's cyber infrastructure needs. And this has been written in the context of increasing instances of cyber crimes. So in this regard, let us look at some of the suggestions that have been provided by the author to upgrade India's cyber infrastructure. In this line, in a previous DNS video, we have already covered different aspects of cyber security. That is, what are the threats, what are its consequences, and finally, what is the setup that has been created by the government of India to deal with the cyber crimes. In this regard, first let us look at the suggestions that have been provided by the author in this article, and then let us revise from a previous DNS video various aspects of cyber security. So while highlighting the importance for cyber infrastructure for dealing with cyber crimes, the author highlights that the electronic evidence is different in nature when it is compared with evidence of traditional crimes. And that is why it has highlighted that laying down standard and uniform procedures to deal with the electronic evidence is essential. In this line, it has been highlighted that the guidelines for identification, collection, acquisition, and preservation of digital evidence has been provided in India in the form of Indian standard issued by the Bureau of Indian Standards BIS. And this can become a useful tool for electronic evidence collection and its usage as well as preservation of the digital evidence. Second issue that has been highlighted by the author regarding the cyber infrastructure is that there is shortage of technical staff in the police force. In this line, traditionally what has been happening is that the current police force is dealing with the issues related to the cyber crimes. However, the police officers in the police force are not adequately equipped to handle the emerging issues in the cyber crimes. And that is why the author has highlighted that there have been half-hearted efforts by the states to recruit technical staff for investigation of cybercrime. And that is why it is suggested that it is essential that the state governments build up sufficient capability to deal with the cybercrime. And it could be done by either setting up a separate cyber police station in each district or range, or having technically qualified staff in every police station in the state. Third issue is related to the upgradation of the cyber labs. And in this line, it has been highlighted that the cyber forensic laboratories of the states must be upgraded with the advent of new technologies like cryptocurrency, blockchain, etc. In this line, one of the prime example is that of National Cyber Forensic Lab and Cyber Prevention Awareness and Detection Center (CyPAD) of the Delhi Police, and it can be replicated in other states of India as well. And finally, the author has highlighted the need for data localization and localization of various agencies which are required to monitor the online content which has issues related to cyber crimes. In this line, it has been highlighted that most of the cyber crimes are transnational in nature with extraterritorial jurisdiction. In this line, the collection of evidence from the foreign territories is really difficult for the Indian police forces. That is why the author highlights that there is a need for including data localization in the proposed personal data protection law so that the enforcement agencies are able to get timely access to data of suspected Indian citizens. And finally, it has been highlighted that the center and the states must work not only in tandem to frame statutory guidelines to facilitate investigation of cybercrime, but they also need to commit sufficient funds to develop much awaited and required cyber infrastructure. So these are the broad issues that have been highlighted in this article. After this, let us revise from a previous DNS article where we have already discussed in detail various aspects of cyber warfare and cyber security. So let us revise from that DNS video. Let us look at this previous year question that was asked in 2013 in the General Studies paper 3 by the UPSC in the security section. The question reads, cyber warfare is considered by some defense analysts to be larger threat than even Al-Qaeda or terrorism. What do you understand by cyber warfare, and outline the cyber threats which India is vulnerable to and bring out the state of country's preparedness to deal with the same. So in this article and discussion, we will look at what exactly is meant by this term cyber warfare, what are the kind of tools or what are the types of cyber warfare that can be deployed by various countries. Thirdly, what are the tools that are regularly being used which are the part of cyber attacks. After that, we'll look at India's preparedness. Also, what is the impact of such cyber warfare or cyber attacks? And lastly, we'll look at what are the challenges that India has and also what India needs to do further to boost its cyber security preparedness. So let us look at all these aspects in detail, and they can be very important for us from General Studies paper 3 point of view in the security section in the cyber security part. Now, when it comes to cyber warfare, the cyber warfare is simply the use of cyber attacks against an enemy state. So in this context, it is similar to the typical or the traditional and the conventional warfare that takes place between two countries. And in this case, in case of cyber warfare, cyber attacks are utilized against an enemy state. Now, if you look at the types of cyber warfares that can be deployed by countries against enemy state, these can be based on the expected or intended outcomes of such cyber attacks. First in this line is the cyber espionage. This simply means spying on the enemy state. In this, the countries utilize the cyber systems or the information systems to spy on the other countries. One of the best examples of spying is simply the Pegasus software that was there in the news recently in case of India. And this Pegasus spyware was being used to spy upon the cell phones. And such Pegasus software can also be used for spying upon the enemy country and its officials. Second intended objective and the type of warfare can be sabotage. That is, the countries utilize the cyber attacks to sabotage any important or critical infrastructure of the other country. For example, an attack was carried out by United States of America that was known as Stuxnet on the Iran's nuclear facility. The third tool that can be used for cyber attacks is the propaganda attack, and this could include the psychological warfare, where the misinformation could be spread related to any particular issue that is ongoing in an enemy state. Also, such cyber attacks can be used for economic disruption, where we are already witnessing certain kinds of cyber attacks on the banking systems and also the data of the citizens. And finally, there can be surprise cyber attacks which can further lead to escalation of warfare between two enemy countries. In this context, let us look in detail what exactly is meant by these types of cyber warfares. Now, if you look at cyber espionage, this simply means the act or practice of obtaining secret information which can be personal, sensitive or classified information of individuals, competitors or the government by the use of malicious softwares which are sometimes known as Trojan horses as well as spywares. And the motive here is to obtain the secret information which could go against the national security of a country. So this kind of threat is also available against India, and this is one of the threats that India faces. Second is basically the sabotage, which means targeting the computer information systems, infrastructure and computer networks. Motive here is to damage or destroy the targeted computer network system. One of the prime example of this is the use of Stuxnet software, which was used by United States of America against Iran's nuclear program to sabotage its nuclear facilities. Third in this line is the cyber terrorism, which simply means convergence of terrorism and cyberspace. Now previously, the terrorists did not have exposure to using the information systems that are coming up because of the information revolution. In this line, the cyberspace is utilized by the terrorists for a number of purposes. These can include planning of terrorist attacks, recruitment of sympathizers, spreading propaganda to radicalize people, and to raise funds. And we are aware that a similar situation we are facing in case of Jammu and Kashmir, in which the terrorist organizations from across the border, which are operating from Pakistan, are utilizing the cyberspace for planning terrorist attacks in India, recruiting sympathizers or terrorists in India, and also spreading propaganda to radicalize people. And also they are using it as a means of funding. Further, we are aware that propaganda is also one of the types of cyber warfare that can be used, and it is basically a part of psychological warfare, and it can lead to controlling the information in whatever form it takes and influence the public opinion. We are aware that such propaganda war is being unleashed in case of Jammu and Kashmir, where the people are getting resented against the Indian state. Also, another type of cyber warfare that can be utilized is the economic disruption. And in this, the prime example of such economic disruption that is caused by the cyber attacks is the example of 2017, when WannaCry and Petya, which are ransomwares, were used to cause large-scale disruptions in Ukraine as well as in United Kingdom's National Health Service. And the last type of cyber warfare that can be utilized is surprise cyber warfare. In this, it is said that such warfare is carried out by a country or its proxies to attack the computer systems in other countries. This can include theft, vandalism, which can include defacing web pages. We continuously see such kind of attacks happening in case of India also, and in case of many other countries. And also destruction of critical information infrastructure. In this line, some of the experts in the cybersecurity space have theorized a case when a cyber Pearl Harbor kind of attack can take place. If you are aware, Pearl Harbor attack took place during the Second World War, when the United States of America also entered into Second World War, and that led to the escalation of the war. So simply, the thinkers or the experts have theorized that a cyber Pearl Harbor kind of attack can take place, which could escalate into a full-blown war. So these are the types of cyber threats or the types of cyber warfares based on the motives that can be utilized by countries against the enemy countries. In this line, let us look at what are the tools that are used to conduct such kind of cyber warfare. Now, to carry out cyber warfare with certain intended motives, the cyber attackers or the countries can use these tools that are available right now. These include malwares, spywares, denial of service, cryptojacking, as well as dark web. So let us look at all these aspects one by one to understand how these tools can be utilized to conduct cyber attacks against the enemy state. So if you look at malware, it is simply a malicious software. So that is why it is called as malicious for mal and ware for software. So it is simply any program or file that is harmful to a computer user. And this can include viruses, worms, Trojan horses, as well as spyware. So it is a broad term that is used for softwares which are utilized and that are harmful to computer users. Now such malwares, which are types of softwares, can perform a variety of functions. These can include stealing, encrypting or deleting sensitive data, altering or hijacking core computing functions, and monitoring the user's computer activity without their permission. A prime example of such malware is basically the Stuxnet, which was used by USA against Iran's nuclear installations. A type of malware is basically a spyware which is used to spy upon the enemy country and its officials or population. In this line, Pegasus is a surveillance software that has been developed by the Israel, and this software is used by Israel to track the terrorist activities. However, this can also be utilized against enemy states. And Pegasus related issue has also come up in case of India, where journalists have accused the government of spying on them. Now this enables remote surveillance of mobile phones. In this line, USA had started a surveillance program which tried to spy upon the heads of the governments of different countries, and this program was started by the National Security Agency of United States of America. So this also utilized certain kinds of spywares to spy upon the heads of the states or heads of the governments of different countries. Further, Germany was also accused of carrying out such surveillance program in the past. Then there is denial of service, that is also a kind of malware attack. This basically prevents or impairs the authorized use of information system. For example, ransomware and WannaCry, which was utilized in case of Ukraine and UK's National Health Services. And this basically stopped, or it was used as a ransomware. Ransomware because it installs a software in the computer systems which asks for a payment of certain amount, and only then the user can access that particular computer. So basically, WannaCry was a kind of ransomware that was utilized to stop or cripple the Ukraine as well as United Kingdom's National Health Services. Then another term or another tool that is being utilized these days is known as cryptojacking. Now simply we are aware that the cryptocurrencies are created through a process called mining, which utilizes high-scale computations using the computer systems. And in this mining process, to mine digital coins, which are cryptocurrencies, the miners need to use high-end processors that consume a lot of electricity. Now these mining processes that are utilized by various miners across the globe to create the cryptocurrencies, they drop malware in an unsuspecting user's computer. Now these malwares that are deployed by the cryptojackers for creating cryptocurrencies do not use the victim's data. However, what they do is that they drain the resources of the CPUs of the computer, and it ultimately leads to slowing down of the system and also leads to increased electricity usage and can cause irreparable damage to the hardware of that particular computer. So because the mining process requires high-end computational processes, the cryptojackers, what they do is that they install malwares and utilize the processing capability of any unsuspecting computer system, which ultimately leads to increased electricity usage, slowing down of the system, and also leading to irreparable damage to the hardware. And then we are aware that there is deep web and dark web, which is also a tool used to carry out cyber attacks. Now deep web or dark web simply refers to anything that is existing on the internet. However, they are not accessible via search engines like Google. And this dark web is utilized by terrorist organizations, smugglers, as well as hackers. So after looking at the tools of the cyber warfare, let us look at what can be the impact of such kind of cyber attacks. And this impact, India is also vulnerable to. First is of course the loss of integrity, which means unauthorized changes that are made to data or the IT systems, which can result in inaccuracy, fraud, or erroneous decision making that brings the integrity of the system under suspicion. For example, a lot of data is being utilized in the Indian government in order to take certain decisions. However, if the cyber attacks are carried out, the data will be compromised, and in that case, the policy making process can get hampered. Second is the loss of availability, which can include an attack on mission critical IT systems, which makes it unavailable to the end users. For example, if the system provides that the users can utilize a particular facility of the government of India by using Aadhaar cards, and if the Aadhaar system is hijacked, then this will lead to loss of availability. Then there is loss of confidentiality, which simply leads to privacy of the data of the individuals, and the consequence can be unauthorized disclosure of information, which ranges from loss of public confidence to national security threats. Then there are also threats of physical destruction, which means ability to create actual physical harm or destruction through the use of IT systems. And a prime example of this is Stuxnet, which was utilized by USA to stop the nuclear program and attack the nuclear facility in Iran. Then it can lead to impact on data, where it can lead to impact on confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data. It can also impact on critical information infrastructure. For example, a cyber attack was carried out by the Chinese hackers on the power system in Mumbai, and that brought the entire city to a halt. In this, the local trains, which are considered as Mumbai's lifeline, were stopped functioning and people got stranded. Similar was the attack that was carried out by USA, that was Stuxnet. Then it can lead to financial losses, and according to the Data Security Council of India, India has been the second most cyber attacks affected country between 2016 to 2018. And lastly, it affects the national security, peace and stability in a country. So these are some of the impacts of the cyber attacks. This brings us to what is the cyber security preparedness of India, which has also been asked multiple times by UPSC in the previous years. First is the Section 66F of the Information Technology Act. In this, specific provisions have been provided for dealing with issue of cyber terrorism and provide for punishment which may extend to lifetime imprisonment. Then National Cyber Security Policy was created in 2013, or which proposes to create a workforce of 5 lakh professionals that are skilled in cyber security. Then there is National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, or NCIIPC. It was established under the Information Technology Act 2000 to secure India's critical information infrastructure. And this can be seen as the national nodal agency in respect of critical information infrastructure protection. Then there is CERTAIN, which is an emergency response system that has been created, and the purpose of CERTAIN is to respond to computer security incidents, report on vulnerabilities, and promote effective IT security practices throughout the country. Then there is Cyber Surakshit Bharat initiative, and it was launched in 2018 with the aim to spread awareness about cyber crimes, building capacity for safety measures for chief information security officers and frontline IT staff across all the government departments. And then a National Cyber Coordination Center has been created. It seeks to generate necessary situational awareness of existing and potential cybersecurity threats and enable timely information sharing for proactive, preventive, and protective actions by the individuals. This also brings us to what are the certain challenges that India still faces despite having preparedness against the cyber attacks. In this line, one of the challenges is that India is not a member of the Budapest Convention on Cybersecurity. This Budapest Convention is the first international treaty which seeks to address internet and computer crime by harmonizing national laws, improving investigative techniques, and increasing cooperation among the nation. Secondly, there is lack of private sector participation in the cybersecurity framework. Also, there is shortage of the skilled professionals because the National Cybersecurity Policy 2013 had aimed at creating skilled workforce which will help in cybersecurity purposes. However, that has not been created. So one of the challenges that India faces is that we should strengthen IT Act as well as National Cybersecurity Policy 2013. And we are aware that many new challenges have come up in the case of cybersecurity attacks since this policy was created. That is why there are talks of reforming this National Cybersecurity Policy. In this line, legal and facilitative framework to fight cyber crimes are outdated and they are not well equipped enough to handle the technological advances in the case of cyber crimes. So what are the steps that India can take to improve its cybersecurity preparedness now? First is, of course, appointment of chief information security officers in all the organizations. Secondly, funds should be earmarked specifically for dealing with cybersecurity threats. Also, government should provide tax incentives to companies to upgrade their information infrastructure. Investment should also be done in case of research and development to improve cybersecurity, and this can utilize technologies like big data, artificial intelligence, etc. Further, there is a need for enhancing awareness among the people through awareness campaigns, and also there should be stricter regulatory compliance and increased self-reporting of these security incidents and breaches. Also, there is a need to improve the cyber insurance to protect the critical assets. Then crimeware or ransomware as a service is transitioning into a highly profitable industry which needs to be stopped. And last but not the least, there is a need for updating outdated as well as open source softwares, because criminals these days are continuously on a lookout for outdated web softwares, and that is why there is a need for urgently upgrading these softwares to meet the latest cyber challenges. So these are the different dimensions of the cyber warfare and the cyber security threats faced by India, also the preparedness and what needs to be done further. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 1 is related to one of the biggest achievement of India in terms of commissioning of the first indigenous aircraft carrier in the Indian Navy. Now, this is one of the important achievements of India in terms of indigenization of defense technology, and it is going to increase India's stature globally as one of the important naval powers. In this line, let us look at few aspects of the INS Vikrant from the prelims examination perspective, and what is the significance of the commissioning of this first indigenous aircraft carrier. Now, this first indigenous aircraft carrier of India, INS Vikrant, has been inspired from the previous INS Vikrant, which was decommissioned in late 1990s. In this line, the old INS Vikrant was the first ever aircraft carrier that was operated by Indian Navy. Originally, this aircraft carrier was known as the HMS Hercules, and it was purchased by India in 1957. Now, this indigenous aircraft carrier was commissioned in 1961 and it was decommissioned in 1997 after 36 years of service. Now, this old INS Vikrant aircraft carrier had played a significant role in the 1971 war with Pakistan, and it was especially useful in blockading the East Pakistan in terms of naval blockade. And this had provided considerable leverage to India, which had ultimately led to the partition of Pakistan and independence of East Pakistan, which converted itself into an independent country, Bangladesh. Now, with the commissioning of the new INS Vikrant, India has achieved various milestones here. In this line, it is the first ever aircraft carrier to be indigenously designed and constructed. Further, this INS Vikrant will strengthen India's standing as a blue water navy, which signifies that India is a maritime force with global reach and capability to operate over deep seas. Further, the deployment of this INS Vikrant is going to significantly expand India's footprints across the Indo-Pacific region. Further, by commissioning of the INS Vikrant, India has joined the elite group of nations which are capable of designing and constructing aircraft carriers. These countries include the United States of America, Russia, France, UK and China. So along with these countries, India is now a part of this elite club, which is capable of designing and constructing aircraft carriers. In this line, INS Vikrant is said to be the 7th largest amongst the carriers or carrier classes in the world. So these are few important achievements for India, which can be important for us from the prelims examination perspective related to the commissioning of this new INS Vikrant. And if you want to learn more about defense indigenization, we have already covered this aspect in a previous DNS video on 21st August 2022. So you can go and revise from that video various aspects of defense indigenization in India. With this, we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.